Also, our principal sir, Dr. Joan Verghese, have joined us. We are delighted and honored to have you with us, sir. Also, I welcome our wonderful audience who have gathered here to attend this session. Thank you for your time and patience. And I hand over the mic to Dr. Tharoor. Sir,
Thank you very
please.
much. Thank you very much, Amal, and the moderator, Chiti. I'm very happy to address this virtual gathering of students of my alma mater and others joining in. It's always a pleasure to interact with the students of St. Stephen's College, a place where I spent some of my most enjoyable and most educative years. Normally, I make at least a couple of visits back to college each year, but sadly, thanks to the limitations imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, for the first time, we'll have to stick to a virtual interaction, though I really look forward to being able to come back to the North Campus once all of this is behind us. Now, the St. Stephen's College Student Media Cell had asked me to share my thoughts on the topic of how media influences politics, and I was happy to do so because the topic is obviously of importance to the future of our democracy and one that all concerned citizens of our country, as I'm sure all of you listening in are, must take cognizance of, because it does affect in so many ways the kind of society and nation we live in. Now, in the interest of the limited time we have, what I'm going to try and do, as we've all agreed with the organizers, is to try and confine myself to about 10 minutes of introductory remarks now, and then discussing the themes I've raised and any other issues in your minds in the discussion to follow. So my first proposition is that Indian media reflects in many ways the transformation that the nation has undergone since independence, because obviously the supposedly sort of timeless and unchanging India of Western cliche has been transformed unrecognizably. And one would argue that that's also been reflected in the dramatic changes in our country's media. Once dominated by government programming, India's visual media landscape is now brimming, as we all know, with multiple private offerings, over 100 24/7 news television channels in multiple languages. In my relatively small state of Kerala alone, we have 13 all news channels 24/7 in Malayalam. And this kind of news-focused media relentlessly assaulting the Indian public is part of what we're talking about. The competition in the space has grown. Indian media outlets have had to compete with each other towards capturing the largest number of eyeballs, because of course, the more eyeballs you capture, the more advertising revenue comes. And that, of course, is how you stay viable. And in the process, we have in many ways seen a decline within the fourth estate, because far from the so-called golden years of the print media, where a real premium was placed on editorial standards, equality of media stories, journalistic ethics, and all of that, the fourth estate now has morphed into an almost grotesque platform that, particularly on television, serves simultaneously as witness, which it is supposed to, but also as prosecutor, judge, jury, and executioner, which it is most decidedly not. Media now is driven by the breaking news culture, the search for the villain of the day, the news must be broken, and so it seems must the newsmaker be broken. In ancient times, as we all know, India used to put the accused through an Agni Pariksha, a trial by fire. Today, we put them through a trial by media, which is arguably worse. Television news in India has long since given up any pretense of really providing a public service. The breaking news story privileges sensation over substance. And one could argue that Indian television epitomizes the old joke about why television is called a medium, because it is neither rare nor well done. And this is not just for the traditional television media. The fact is, unfortunately, the print media and social media have begun to reflect many of the same qualities. As more Indians enjoy the fruits of literacy and the increasing affordability of smartphones and reduced data costs, we have witnessed a boom in social media. Inevitably, many young people are turning to social media as their first source for immediate news. And at the same time, we have a boom in print, in the circulation of print publications, interestingly enough, as well. But our newspapers also seem conscious that they have to compete in a tight media environment where it's not they, but the TV and the social media that sets the pace. They know that every morning they must reach readers who've already watched TV or read their WhatsApp the previous day. And so newspapers too feel the need to compete with this kind of sensationalistic news, to break news in order to be read, and to outdo their TV and social media competitors. And the result is that our media, in its rush to air the story, has frequently fallen prey to a rush to judgment. It has too often become a willing accomplice of the motivated leak and the malicious allegation, which journalists today have neither the time nor the inclination to check or to verify. Now, we must also recognize that part of this decline we've discussed has also been precipitated by the changing nature of politics, the way politics has come to function and operate in our country. There was a time when the political class recognized and even celebrated the role of the media in keeping our governments and politicians honest, accountable, even humble. I remember the famous story of Prime Minister Nehru meeting the political cartoonist Shankar, Keshav Shankar Pillai, and saying to him, "Don't spare me, Shankar." That despite all of the caricaturing and lampooning of him by Shankar, Nehru respected the importance of the free media that Shankar represented and gave him the Padma Shri, the Padma Bhushan, eventually the Padma Vibhushan, even though he'd been such a major critic of the Prime Minister. And Nehru said, "Shankar is a rare gift, rarer in India than elsewhere, and without the least bit of malice or ill will, he points out with an artist's skill the weaknesses and foibles of those who display themselves on the public stage. It's good to have the veil of our conceit torn occasionally." How many politicians today are willing to have the veil of our conceit torn occasionally? I tweeted a rather harmless joke that compared the growing length of the Prime Minister's beard in the last 6 years with the decline in the graph of our GDP. And I said, this is what is meant by a graphic illustration. And the kind of vituperation I was subjected to by BJP supporters, including by ministers of the cabinet, was, I thought, a reflection of the fact that there is not only no willingness to let the veil of conceit be torn aside, but there is an intolerance even of humor being applied to politicians. Now, the political class has actively worked to subvert and undermine the importance of press freedom, but in a more serious way than cartoons or jokes. They're using both co-optation and intimidation to ensure that the press only produces news that's sympathetic to them or to their causes. India's free press, which ought to be calling the government's actions to account, has seemingly been cowed by the government, a process that seems to involve the government either cajoling or cudgeling the media into so-called mainstream media, so that now the very few critical voices that remain appear to be on the web, because the deinstitutionalization of Indian governance is well advanced now with the assault on the media. And the greatest danger facing our country's democracy will be of the people losing faith in our system altogether, with incalculable consequences for our democracy. Because this effort to sort of completely disempower and reduce the freedoms of our independent fourth estate, this attempt has undoubtedly affected people's confidence in the media, because people now have begun to be quite cynical about what they hear on the media. And that, I think, is weakening a vital pillar of our democracy, because the free press is both the mortar that binds together the bricks of our country's freedom and the open window embedded in those bricks. And therefore, it's in our collective interest to find solutions to the ailments of the media in the political arena. And I want to make it very clear, no Indian Democrat should or would or could call for censorship or for controls on the free press. In fact, what we want is not less journalism, but better journalism. How do we get there? Let me end my remarks with half a dozen broad suggestions that I believe can improve the state of our media today, particularly in its coverage of politics. And then we'll have an exchange, all of us, about it. First, we must engender a culture of fact verification and fact checking that the industry currently appears to lack. Journalists should not feel pressed by their employers to break the news, but should instead be empowered to hold stories until they're sure that their facts and accusations are accurate. The rush to judgment on the basis of partial information must stop. Thinking of poor Ria Chakravarti in Bombay, for that matter, my own experiences at the hand of the media when my late wife passed away, we've had a lot of unpleasantness that is totally without any basis. Second, we must insist on better journalistic training at accredited media institutes, training that emphasizes the values of accuracy, integrity, and fairness amongst journalism students. These standards should extend to the media organizations themselves. When false claims or intentionally misleading statements are published or broadcast, TV and print news outlets should issue retractions with equal prominence. They don't. Third, we must welcome different perspectives in our newsrooms and not allow them to become echo chambers, forcing an opinion onto their viewers in the guise of the nation wants to know. Newsrooms must be required to maintain a more diverse journalistic environment. Every story plugging a point of view must be required to provide some space for the alternative view or for a refutation. Fourth, journalists must welcome comments and feedback from their viewers and readers to generate both an environment of trust between the consumers and the media and the feeling on the part of the public that they're not merely passive recipients of somebody's point of view. There's only one newspaper that I'm aware of, The Hindu, that has a reader's editor who serves as a sort of ombudsman for the newspaper and acknowledges in print mistakes of fact or emphasis in the newspaper's coverage. This helps drive a natural cycle of loyalty and engagement between the paper and its readers. Fifth, government must introduce laws and regulations that limit the control of multiple news organizations by a single business or political entity, which would only encourage an independent and robust press in the country. Let's face it, powerful business interests are vulnerable to government pressures. If a newspaper is owned by somebody whose other businesses earning far more money and involving far more capital are vulnerable to a tax raid or an ED investigation, then they're much more easily pressured into curbing the editorial freedom of their media publications. And I'm not speaking in theory, this has already happened in very many cases in our media. So ethical journalistic concerns will always take second place to the business interests of the owners. We really are amongst one of the very few countries in the world, amongst the democracies, where no restrictions currently exist when it comes to media ownership by our own citizens. Finally, sixth and last suggestion, a single overseer for print and television news companies, as recommended by the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, would help limit the power of corporate and political behemoths over our media and help promote media standards. So my conclusion on all of these brief thoughts is that the free press is like the parrot in a cage that's sent down a mine shaft to see if there's enough oxygen at the bottom. You know that miners have this parrot or a canary, it said, and if that bird comes back either dead or choking and spluttering for air, that's when you know it's not safe for miners to go down. That's the role the media plays in our society. If the media is choking or suffocated, if its freedom is dead or dying, then it's a clear indication that our society is no longer safe for the rest of us. We have to ensure that doesn't happen. Thank you all for listening to me. I look forward to your questions. Jai Hind.
Thank you for sharing your astute observations with us, sir. We'll now move on to the interactive part of the evening. I'd like to invite Sagarika Chaudhary from St. Stephen's College. You may unmute and ask your question right now. Go ahead.
Good evening, sir.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I was wondering, in today's day and age when we have fake news and propaganda news, spreading like wildfire, how should we as readers or as the audience sift the lies from the truth?
Well, that's precisely why I called for fact checking early on in my remarks, which is that, in fact, when there is fake news, how do you check that it's fake? Now, many of us have an instinct honed over many years of reading and study. Many young people don't or haven't yet acquired that. So, what do we need? We need some reputable fact checkers. Now, with serious independent newspapers, it used to be assumed that no editor would publish something without having checked the facts first. The sad truth, however, is that particularly these days, and particularly because in social media and on television, there is no fact checking, very often the print media also does the same sort of thing irresponsibly. What we therefore need is some serious fact checking. On social media now, some sites have come up. One of the best known is Alt News, which actually will go into a story and demonstrate whether it's true or false. And I think we need some equivalent of that. And if it's linked to something like a reader's editor or an ombudsman who is obliged to carry corrections if a false story has been reported, then even if the damage is done by a print media today, then tomorrow the reader's editor will carry the correction. So regular fact checking, I think, is the only answer. Otherwise, be as widely read and informed as possible so that you actually have in your own capacity the ability to form your own judgment. The better read you are, the better educated, the better informed you are, the less likely you are to be fooled by a fake story. But some of us, including myself, we can always be taken for a ride by a seemingly plausible story. And that's why it becomes very important for us to be able to have that fact-checking capacity built into the media.
Thank you, sir.
Right, thank you. Moving on, Shashank Shekhar from BHU. Kindly unmute yourself and ask your question.
Namaste, sir. This is
Namaste.
Shashank. This is Shashank Shekhar, and I'm a big fan of yours, like everyone present here. So I wanted to ask, today it was in news that Freedom House, a US NGO, has downgraded India from a free to a partially free democracy. We are slipping in democracy index rank. We are on 51st rank. So what I wanted to ask that I, as a college going student, feel frustrated out of this. So what we common citizens or people like us can do so that we don't end up in such a fate?
It's a difficult one to answer because these ratings are based essentially, Shashank, on government conduct. And not just government, it's government plus media, plus judiciary, plus everything else. But it's true that we've been going down. There's not only Freedom House, there is a very prestigious Swedish institute called the VDEM Institute, which also issues rankings, and we have plummeted in those rankings also. In fact, they issued a warning that we may no longer be able to call India a democracy if it continues like this. And it doesn't help when our government encourages the filing of meaningless sedition cases and arrests journalists, comedians, threatens to arrest politicians. I mean, these are not healthy things for any country that wants to be recognized around the world as a democracy. Now, I don't want to give a free pass to all these ratings agencies because ultimately what really matters is what Indians feel about their own country. But one of the things we feel is that we're proud of being recognized around the world as the world's largest democracy. And it makes us feel ashamed as Indians when our democracy is conducted in a manner that invites this kind of criticism. As I say, I don't fully agree with, let's say, Freedom House, for example. I remember there was a time when they were excessively formalistic. They would look at the language of laws rather than the way in which the laws were implemented or not implemented. And so, for example, the fact that there were formal restrictions, in theory, at least on press freedom, should also be looked against various Supreme Court judgments that have interpreted those so liberally that, in fact, we had perhaps the freest press in the world. I mean, certainly at a time when there was no let's say in American democracy, there was no major publication or media outlet espousing a socialist or communist point of view. In India, we had newspapers for everything, right? And channels and sites expressing every idea from the extreme left to the extreme right. So in some ways, we would argue that there was a time when our freedom of expression was perhaps wider than that of many established Western democracies. So I don't just give, I'm not only taking the Western ranking seriously, but I must say that it's like a thermostat. It's showing us where we are going wrong, where the temperature of our democracy has turned in a bad direction. And I think that the government has only itself to blame, its conduct and the kind of conduct that it has condoned in its name. So if the government would ease up and be a little more, shall we say, permissive, or at least allowing of greater freedom of expression and criticism of its own actions and policies, then we should be able to be once again hailed as a free democracy in the world.
Thank you, sir.
Right. So Yog Raghuvanshi from St. Stephen's College, please go ahead and ask your question.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening,
So,
Suyuk.
we have always had this tradition of court poets and bards composing prashastis and charitas in ancient India, singing praises of their patrons. So, a similar tradition also continued in the medieval India. Can this be compared to the current state of media where they are busy beating trumpets of their political masters and patrons? If yes, how difficult will it be to do away with this tradition, which has been so integral for the propagation of the ideologies of those who exercise power?
No, but Suyog, the truth is that those sort of panegyrics to rulers and things were actually done by courtiers, by court poets. People were appointed to the court to write poems and verses praising the emperors and kings. Whereas what we are seeing today is nominally free media that has nothing to do with the government, that is not controlled officially by the government, that is not owned by the government, that doesn't report to the government, behaving as if they are camp followers of the ruling party. That's the irony. So, having a court tradition, let's face it, when I was growing up, we only had official television, Doordarshan, and only had official radio, All India Radio, not like today. So obviously we didn't expect any criticism of the government on All India Radio or Doordarshan, because they were officially, as you know, they were the court poets of the government. But the print media, newspapers and magazines, those are the days before internet or social media. So the print media was where the press freedom was allowed to flourish, and where indeed there was very severe criticism of the government. And there were, if you like, today's equivalent of websites for things like newsletters. There used to be one from Bombay run by a man called A.D. Gorwala called Opinion, which is printed in a few pages and circulated informally. That was absolutely powerful and excoriating in its criticism of the government. And of course, you had negative comments in various media publications, books were written, all sorts of things. So you had the ability to criticize in multiple forums. Now, today, those forums have not all disappeared. You can still, for example, if you want to see some pretty tough criticism of the government, you can go on The Wire, you can go on The Quint, you can go on Scroll, multiple other websites like that. You can certainly see some courageous editorializing in some of the mainstream publications. The Indian Express and the Hindu in particular come to mind. But what has surprised people is that for the most part, the mainstream media, the big publications, whether in their news coverage or in their editorial opinion writing, have essentially towed a conformist line. And they don't need to. They're not owned by the government. They're not accountable to the government. They're accountable to their readers and to the public of India. But they have decided that it's more to their advantage to go and do that. Now, this has actually cost them a great deal in credibility. And so you're seeing, for example, something like, I've actually quoted once a friend of mine saying that, when I was young, my father would not believe something until he saw it printed in the Times of India. Today, he doesn't believe something if he sees it printed in the Times of India. Now, that's the kind of change of credibility that has occurred in much of our mainstream media. And I think it's deplorable, particularly since it doesn't need to be. I see somebody has sent me a message on the chat box saying that my list of independent websites, I left out News Laundry, and I'm sure there are a few others, and particularly in other languages, there must be a few others. I know that in Kerala politics, a lot of people turn to independent YouTube channels like Marunadan Malayali and so on, which essentially have no TV studios of their own and no channels to broadcast in, but which basically push out YouTube videos on WhatsApp and easily get 25, 35, 45,000 viewers for each thing they put out. And that becomes an alternative medium as well. So alternatives do exist, but the mainstream seems to have completely become conformist. That's the pity.
Thank you, sir.
Karki Singh from Miranda House, please go ahead.
Good evening, sir. First of all, it's a great opportunity to share the platform with you here. My question is, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is that do you think that it is due to the privatization of media that we have so many news agencies publishing whatever they feel like or their opinions, and that ending up in confusing the masses and also creating false and fake news in the nation?
No, but I think media should be privately owned. I mean, that's the entire point. In a democracy, free expression is a right that inheres in every one of us as citizens. Just as you should be free to publish your views on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, so should a larger entity be free to publish their views in a printed newspaper or magazine or on a television channel. That's what press freedom is all about. So I don't think that that you can in any way, shape or form nationalize media in a democracy. It has to be private. So privatization is not the problem. The problem is that in the absence of any other regulation, the private media is often in the hands of people who have other business interests that may interfere with their upholding of press freedom, as I pointed out. So, if all it takes is for the owner of a newspaper to essentially be threatened with an income tax raid for his or her other businesses, if the newspaper he or she owns doesn't fall in line, then the newspaper is brought in line. But I don't think that there is any other solution but to leave the media in private hands. It would be terrible if we went the other way.
Thank you so much, sir.
Right, Akanksha from Hansraj College, kindly unmute yourself and ask the question.
Good evening, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, Akanksha.
Yes, sir. So as you talk about different perspective in media, sir, my question is that religion is always an influencing factor in Indian politics. And now media brings up with very notion of culture, ethnicity, nationalism, all into the public platform with majoritarian perspective, as it implies that the duo of religion and media is now becoming the primary determining factor of national politics in India.
It's a tough one. This majoritarianism that has been creeping across our public space, reflected in the electoral victories of 2014 and 2019, and then, of course, very, very much, as you say, apparent in our public discourse, including our political discourse, worries people like me. A lot of my books are a response to that, I would say, destructive majoritarianism that has actually argued somehow that this is a country that explicitly belongs to people of one particular faith who happen to constitute the majority, and that everyone else is here only on sufferance. Unfortunately, people who think that way, sadly, are in power or associated with the ruling establishment, and their views are given a great deal of legitimacy and respectability as a result. But I would argue, Akanksha, that the best way of chasing out bad ideas like majoritarian ones is to air counter ideas, is to be able to express the case for the alternative, for why majoritarianism is not just wrong in many ways, it's un-Indian, it's anti-Indian. If you look at my most recent book, The Battle of Belonging, where I confront head on the entire issue of nationalism and patriotism in the Indian context, with a reference to the global situation and to the theory and practice and evolution of the ideas of nationalism, but specifically anchoring it to the struggle for India's soul between the majoritarians and those who uphold diversity. This is the majoritarians and the pluralists, I suppose, would be the right shorthand. This is an ongoing battle. It isn't lost yet. And each of us must fight it, first of all, in the realm of ideas, and then in the realm of politics. I'm trying to do both, but certainly both battles need, shall we say, hardworking and committed idealists to pursue these battles, battles of ideas and battles of politics in our democracy.
Thank you, sir.
Sashwant Pandey from St. Stephen's College. Please unmute yourself and ask the question.
A very good afternoon, sir. It certainly is a privilege to be given this opportunity to interact with you. So quickly moving on to my question, sir. How, according to you, the government can draw a fine line between controlling spread of misinformation and hate speech on one hand and undermining internet and media freedom on the other? Do we need to establish yet another expensive bureaucratic structure as a regulatory body, or we should follow Italy by adding relevant themes in school curriculum or something else together?
That's fascinating. I now thought of, first of all, let me comment on your T-shirt, because I went to St. Stephen's when there wasn't such a thing as a St. Stephen's T-shirt. But I think if we had invented one, we would have put the Stephanian star in the middle of it. What happened to that? That's something you guys should have in on your T-shirts, if I may suggest that. But coming back to your important question, no, I don't think we need a bureaucratic regulator. There is the Press Council for India, which is headed by a retired judge, actually. But the problem is it's often derided as a toothless body. And I have met them and spoken to them, and clearly there is an argument you need something bigger than the Press Council that actually regulates all news media, whichever form that news media takes, including television. And at the moment, there isn't any such thing. But the regulation should consist of something that respects the freedom of the media and that involves media representatives in talking about the standards that they're seeking to attain and whatever obstacles they may have in receiving complaints from the public, etc. So we'll just have to see how to work that out. There are some discussions going on. I wasn't aware of the Italian model, and if you have any information on that, do send it to me by email at office@tharoor.in, THAROOR.in, because the truth is that we're all looking for good ideas. Self-regulation is often preferred by the media because they then get to control their own regulations, as it were. But very often critics of the media will tell you that's not good enough. And that's why I think if it's not self-regulation, it needs to be a light regulation, which is more about the upholding of standards than about the issuing of restrictions.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Ashwin.
Next, we have Paul Thomas from the Department of Social Work, Delhi University. Paul Thomas, kindly unmute yourself.
Good evening, sir. Sir, my question is regarding the alternative media that you talked about in one of the previous responses. So it's regarding how this alternative media is acting as an antidote to the conformist tendency that we see in the mainstream media. So what positive impact, according to you, can the parallel online media establishment and YouTube-based news media can make in the political scenario of the country?
Well, it's making an impact, Paul. I mean, you seem as if you might be a Malayali yourself, so I don't know how much you follow Kerala politics. You'll find a lot of it comes through alternative media. I saw a very interesting poll last week that said that 72% of people in Kerala get their political news not from newspapers is 40%, but from either TV or social media. And WhatsApp apparently is used by over 80% of politically conscious Malayalis, those who are actually following political events. So in fact, you can actually reach more voters on WhatsApp. And it doesn't surprise me that the politically alert and active Malayalis I know are sending, I'm not exaggerating, dozens of video clips from these alternative YouTube channels on WhatsApp and influencing each other in that way. I am an old-fashioned person in that sense that I grew up reading newspapers, so I still rely on the print media for the bulk of my news. But I recognize that that is changing, and that for a lot of young people, in particular, that that's no longer the way in which they consume their information. And therefore, this alternative media we talked about will actually go very far. To my mind, it's actually sobering. People like me who live by the written word, we are becoming more and more irrelevant. I can write a very solidly grounded book, but I will reach a fraction of the people that a 2-minute or 3-minute video going around on WhatsApp will reach. And that itself contributes, unfortunately, to a simplification of political discourse, because there is much less room for complex ideas in a 2 or 3 minute YouTube video. But it is happening. And if you were to ask, what do we do about it? I think all we can do is try and feed that machine with good information, accurate information, liberal information, pluralistic information. In many ways, I feel sad for the mainstream media that they're doing themselves out of a job by producing such unimpressive and uninspiring fare that people are more and more turning to alternative media to get their news, information, and even entertainment.
Thank you, sir.
Arjun Kathuria, please ask your question now. Are you here?
Hello, sir. I'm Adin.
Hi.
So you spoke about the lack of tolerance of humor. What do you have to say about the recent arrests of popular stand-up comedians on crimes like dissent?
Yeah, that was really shocking. I mentioned it actually, Aryan, in my remarks earlier, that the government, I think it was an answer to one of the first questions, that the government's habit of arresting people, whether it's journalists or comedians, is truly damaging our image internationally. I think it's shocking that in the case of poor Munawar Farooqi, he was actually arrested for a joke he hadn't cracked. But the police, on the basis of a previous deleted YouTube post, said, you would have cracked this joke. And he had actually cracked a particular joke once, decided that it was not a good idea, apologized and deleted it from his YouTube account, so that joke can no longer be found. But on the basis of the fact that he had once cracked something 2 years previously, he was accused of intending to crack it again at this function and was arrested for a joke he hadn't cracked. I mean, this is almost laughable. And this is one of the things that makes us look so bad in the eyes of these agencies that rate our democracy. Clearly, no democracy behaves this way. And it's shameful. On the larger question of humor, I do think it's sad that we have so little humor in our politics. It really is, to my mind, a matter for great regret that a culture which used to have the capacity to laugh at itself. Mahatma Gandhi had an impish sense of humor, for example. I don't know how many of you remember some of his cracks, when he was going up to Buckingham Palace in his half dhoti with a bare chest. One of the journalists asked him, do you think you're dressed appropriately to meet His Majesty the King Emperor? And Mahatma Gandhi replied with a chuckle, oh, His Majesty has on enough clothes for the two of us. Similarly, a journalist asked him once, Mahatma Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization? And he smiled and said, I think it would be a very good idea. These kinds of jokes and humor were so much present. And I talked about Nehruji enjoying cartoons against himself. Those days seem to be gone. There's simply no humor. Everyone takes themselves far too seriously. And we have become a culture that prides itself on being offended rather than laughing at ourselves. I think that's really sad.
Thank you.
I'm afraid, moderator, we'll have time for one last question, because then I will have to move on.
Good evening, Mr. Tharoor.
Yeah, hi.
I was asking that what the government is trying to do by launching alternatives to social media apps which are currently prevalent in our society, like WhatsApp, like Sandesh, which was an alternative to Twitter and all. What it is trying to do? Is it trying to keep an eye on our voices, or is it trying to manipulate our voices, or is it trying to spread a fake agenda in our society?
Well, with this ruling party, anything is possible, but on the face of it, it's not. All they're saying is that this is an alternative a government authorized medium which government officials can use. So, for example, Sandesh is supposed to be an SMS service for government officials on official government matters, just as we have nick.in and gov.in email addresses that government officials are supposed to use. So I think that that's all right for government purposes. For example, if you have your own, let's say WhatsApp or Signal or whatever to communicate to your friends, but as a Sarkari Babu, you're writing messages to other Sarkari Babus on Sandesh, I don't think anyone can object, because the government may find it easier to control that. It may be easier to protect it also from being hacked by, let's say, foreign spies or anything else. So you could definitely argue that there is very much a case to be made for allowing the government service. What would be worrying would be if that became the only service. No, in authoritarian tyranny like China, you can't use some of these private services. You can only use the authorized Chinese-made equivalent. So you have to use Weibo where there's no Twitter, or you have to use their search engine and not Google. You have to use their SMS service rather than WhatsApp, etc., so that the government can control it. Now, India fortunately hasn't reached there. In India, they have the government service, but they also have the private services, the global services. And as long as we're a democracy, I'm hoping that will continue to be the case. So for that reason, Adarsh, at the moment, I don't think we need to worry.
Unfortunately, we seem to have run out of time and won't be entertaining any more questions. Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for a very delightful session. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we surely did. I'd like to invite our president for the vote of thanks now.
And Chiti, you've been a very good moderator. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's been a very engaging 3 days of our first ever Media Fest of St. Stephen's College. First of all, I would like to thank Honorable Member of the Parliament, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, for sparing your precious time in between the tight schedule of the ongoing Kerala election campaign. I must say it has been a delight to have you with us this evening. Your views on the rating agencies and press freedom was truly inspiring. Thank you for patiently answering the questions from the participants and delivering perspective that will surely guide the students who wish to explore the media industry. My heartfelt gratitude goes to our principal, Professor John Verghese. He has been a supporting pillar to all our activities of the Media Cell from its inception. I would like to take this opportunity to thank BNPS International, the parent sponsor of our cash prizes. The events wouldn't have been the same without you. My sincere thanks goes to the judges of the Stephens Mock Press Conference and News Reading Competition. Before I go further, I would like to say that I've been very impressed by the ability of the participants of the mock press conference and the news reading competitions. My heartfelt thanks to them, and we look forward to hosting you again next year. My sincere gratitude goes to the press conference team, the news reading team, the talks department, the registration team, the tech and publicity team. You have been the backbone of this festival. And like we always emphasize in the Media Cell, in the end, it's all about the people. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the volunteers and participants present here. Hope you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Maris, if you'd like to take over to announce the results of our competitions right now.
Yes. I hope I'm audible, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the closing ceremony of the first annual Fest of Media Cell, the fourth estate, sponsored by BNPS International. So in regards of the fest, our society conducted an inter-college mock press conference and news reading competition over the past 2 days. It was exciting to witness so much talent from our participants. I hope all of you enjoyed this event just as much as we did. Thank you for participating, and we hope to see you all in the coming years as well. So also a big thanks to our judges, as Alex mentioned, Alia, Anna, Levin, Chani, and Ramsha. All the participants shall receive the e-certificates soon. Now, without further ado, I will announce the results. For mock press conference, title of Best Panelist goes to Arvind Ravi from St. Stephen's College. Congrats, Arvind. Also, second position for the Best Panelist Award is being shared by Alia Fatima Sharif from Stella Maris College and Joseph Benno from St. Stephen's College. The title of Best Journalist goes to S. Bala Prasanna from Hansraj College. Big congratulations to Aravind, Alia, Joseph, and Bala. You will all receive the winner certificate and cash prizes. Please to contact the coordinators for more information. Now, moving on, for news reading competition, Best News Reporter Award goes to Prisha Raver from Jesus and Mary College. Congrats, Prisha. You will receive the cash prize and certificate very soon. Since the competition was very tight, we are having consolation for 4 participants. Consolation prizes goes to Alia Fatima Sharif of Stella Maris College, Pooja Uday of Rajagiri College of Management and Applied Science, Calistine Jude Lewis of St. Stephen's College, and Mahima from Bharati College. You will be provided with certificates. Once again, congratulations to all winners, and thank you everyone for being a part of our first annual fest. Hope to see you all next year. Results will be published on our Instagram page as well. Please contact us for any further information. Once again, on behalf of Media Cell and Fourth Estate Committee, thank you all and best wishes.
Thank you for joining us here today. Congratulations to all the winners and have a good day.